Stacey Abrams stood firmly at the podium, her voice carrying through the crowded Georgia Democratic fundraiser. The room, filled with party elites and longtime supporters, fell into complete silence as she lifted her hand and pointed directly at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who sat frozen at the front table. "I've had enough. You need to leave," Abrams shouted, her face burning red with anger, her fingers still aimed at the stunned Crockett. A collective gasp swept across the ballroom. Dozens of phones were immediately lifted into the air to capture what was unfolding. People in the audience exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody had ever seen Abrams lose her composure and like this before, especially not against another Democrat who was considered a rising star in the party. Jasmine Crockett rose slowly from her chair, straightening her bright yellow blazer with steady hands, and then she walked with calm determination toward the microphone. What she said next would leave the entire ballroom completely speechless, and it might very well change the future of the Democratic Party itself. But before we go into her shocking reply, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our explosive political coverage. To truly understand why this moment matters, we need to know who these two powerful women are and led them to this dramatic confrontation. Stacey Abrams was not just another political leader. For years, she had been the undisputed powerhouse of Georgia Democrats. The 50-year-old Yale Law graduate had transformed the legislation across the state, nearly won the governor's race twice, and was widely credited with helping flip Georgia blue. Her voting rights organization had raised millions of dollars. When Abrams spoke, Democrats listened. Her words carried weight that was almost equal to law inside the party. The ballroom at Atlanta's Renaissance Hotel glowed with elegance that evening. The event had drawn the top tier of Georgia politics. State senators, representatives, city mayors, and wealthy donors had each paid $5,000 late to attend what was meant to be a unity fundraiser before the next election season. Bright chandeliers gave off a warm light that fell a house decorated with blue and white flowers. A massive banner reading "Georgia Forward" stretched behind the stage. Jasmine Crockett, however, represented something new. At just 42, the Texas-born, Harvard-educated lawyer had risen quickly from state representative to U.S. Congresswoman. She was known for her sharp words on cable television and her relentless questioning during congressional hearings. She had earned a reputation as someone who would not back down, even when faced with members of her own party's leadership. Her striking yellow blazer that night was impossible to miss among the sea of dark blue suits, a perfect reflection of how her politics stood out from the old guard. Crockett had been invited to the Georgia fundraiser, a gesture from congressional leadership. The party wanted to highlight new, younger voices that could inspire voters. But tension had been building behind the scenes for months. Abrams and her circle held tight control over nearly every Democratic operation in Georgia. They decided which candidates would get support, which issues were prioritized, and how resources were used. That control had been rarely questioned. Until recently, only 3 months earlier, Crockett had appeared on MSNBC and made comments that caused a stir in the party establishment. "We need new voices and new strategies," she had said. "Some of our leaders have lost more than once and still want to run everything. That is not how we win." She hadn't said Abrams' name, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. The clip spread quickly online, gaining more than 2 million views. Abrams saw it, her allies saw it, and none of them forgot it. So when Crockett arrived at the fundraiser, the cold welcome was obvious. Abrams didn't greet her. Loyal Abrams allies who were seated at Crockett's table hardly acknowledged her presence. The tension in the air was heavy and uncomfortable. The evening began with speeches. The mayor of Atlanta spoke first, followed by 2 state senators. Each one praised Abrams for her leadership and her vision. Then Abrams herself took the stage. She began with her familiar, inspiring talk about voting rights and Georgia's future. But about 20 minutes into her remarks, something changed. Her voice grew sharper as she tightened her grip on the podium. "We have a problem in our party," she declared, her tone turning serious. "We have people who come into our state, into our home, and think they can tell us how to run things." The crowd fell into an uneasy silence. Several guests turned to glance at Crockett, who kept her expression calm, though she sat straighter in her chair. People who have never organized in Georgia, who have never registered a single voter here. Abrams continued, her voice rising. People who have not done the work, but still want to criticize those of us who have sacrificed years for this state. A few of her supporters clapped from the back, cheering her on, but others in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of where this was going. "I have lost sleep for Georgia. I've lost 2 elections fighting for Georgia," Abrams said, her voice heavy with emotion. "And I will not sit quietly while outsiders try to tear down what we've built." She still hadn't spoken Crockett's name, but nobody in the room doubted who she was talking about. Phones were recording everywhere. This was not the kind of unity speech donors had expected to hear. Crockett stayed composed, occasionally taking a sip of water, her eyes steady on Abrams. As a former trial lawyer, she was familiar with pressure and confrontation, but this moment was different. This was party business being laid bare in public. A wealthy donor whispered at Crockett's table, "This is out of control." The party chairman seated near the stage sank lower into his seat, looking as though he wished he could vanish. Abrams then reached under the podium and pulled out a folder. "I have here the voting record and public statements from some of our so-called allies," she said, opening it. "People who come to Georgia asking for money and support while underlining our leadership." The chairman tried to rise, maybe hoping to stop her, but Abrams waved him off. "The people in this room deserve to know the truth," she pressed. She began reading quotes from Crockett's interviews, twisting them out of context to make it appear that the congresswoman had repeatedly attacked Georgia Democrats. With every line she read, whispers rippled through the audience. In the back, a Democratic strategist muttered to a reporter, "This is a train wreck. We're exposing everything with donors and press right here." Realizing she was under direct attack, Crockett finally acted. She leaned toward a staffer and whispered. The aide quickly left and returned minutes later with a tablet. Crockett read the screen, nodding slowly. Abrams, meanwhile, kept going, now speaking about the disrespect she felt personally. "When I speak about unity, I mean real unity," Abrams said. "Not fake smiles followed by television interviews where you question my leadership." At last she made the target of her anger clear. Several donors exchanged worried looks. This was not what they had paid to hear. A few discreetly checked their watches or typed messages on their phones. "We have receipts," Abrams declared, her voice booming louder. "Why know who has been loyal and who has been scheming against us?" A state senator caught her eye, gently shaking his head as if urging her to stop, but Abrams was too deep in her emotions to back down. "And if you cannot respect the work we have done, if you cannot honor the sacrifices made by Georgia Democrats, then let me say it plain." She locked eyes with Crockett. "I've heard enough. You need to go." Her words hit the room like a clend. A full people gasped. A donor in the back dropped a glass, the shatter echoing in the hushed silence. For several seconds nobody moved. The party chairman looked horrified. Wealthy donors exchanged nervous stares, some even considering leaving. Reporters and cameras in the back scrambled to capture every second. Jasmine Crockett rose from her chair, her yellow blazer standing out like a warning signal against the dark blues and blacks of the room. She adjusted her skirt, picked up her tablet, and walked toward the stage with measured steps. The audience held its breath. Would there be a physical clash? Would security have to step in? Abrams, perhaps realizing how far she had gone, stepped back slightly as Crockett came closer. But she didn't apologize. She didn't take back her words. Now the two women stood face to face on stage. Both were seasoned attorneys, both respected leaders, both fierce fighters for their communities. The tension between them was thick. The party chairman finally spoke. "Maybe we should take a short break," he suggested nervously, but Crockett lifted her hand. "I believe I was scheduled to speak next," she said calmly, "and I think it's important that I respond to what we just heard." Abrams, knowing she couldn't block her without making the situation worse, stepped aside. But she didn't leave. She stayed on stage, arms crossed tightly. Crockett adjusted the microphone, then looked out at the crowd of stunned faces. She didn't look at Abrams. She let the silence stretch for a long moment. The room was so quiet that even the hum of the air conditioning could be heard. Finally, she spoke. "First," Crockett began, her voice steady and firm, "I want to thank Ms. Abrams for her passion. Passion is what we need in politics today." This was not what anyone had expected. A few puzzled glances passed through the crowd. "I respect the work Stacey has done in Georgia. Her voter registration efforts have been nothing short of groundbreaking." Crockett continued, sounding unexpectedly gracious. Abrams, still standing nearby, looked slightly caught off guard by this approach, but with all due respect, Crockett's tone shifted just enough. "What we just witnessed is exactly why Democrats keep losing races we should be able to win across this country." The room fell even more silent, if such a thing was possible. Crockett held up her tablet. "While I was being publicly scolded, my team sent me something important. This is a list of every Georgia county and how it voted in the last governor's race," she said, turning the screen toward the audience, though only a few could actually see it. "Abrams lost her last race by 82,000 votes, Crockett stated plainly. "And I've identified over 95,000 voters who didn't show up in key counties where Democrats usually perform well." She swiped to another screen on her tablet. "These aren't just numbers to me. I spent yesterday in South Fulton speaking with voters. Do you know what they told me? They're tired of personality cults. They're tired of the same names telling them what to do. They want real results, not endless drama. Several heads in the audience nodded slowly in agreement. Abrams' expression had shifted from visible anger to something more guarded, almost defensive. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and over while expecting a different outcome. Crockett pressed on, her voice growing stronger with every word. We've run the same playbook in Georgia for years now. We've put the same personalities at the center and we've fallen short. She looked directly at Abrams. I didn't come to Georgia to tear down what you built, Stacey. I came because congressional leadership asked to build something stronger, something that can actually win. Crockett turned her attention back to the audience. You don't have to choose between honoring Stacey's contributions and embracing new strategies. We can do both. Then she surprised everyone. She pulled up another screen on her tablet. This is a donation I made to Fair Fight 2 years ago, she said, holding up a receipt for $5,000 given to Abrams' organization. I believed in the mission then, and I still do. But believing in a mission doesn't mean you can't question the methods. Murmurs spread quickly through the crowd. Crockett wasn't attacking Abrams personally. She was challenging her tactics while still showing respect for her work. It was a display of political skill. You told me to get out, Crockett said, looking once again at Abrams. But with all due respect, I can't do that because this party doesn't belong to you, and it doesn't belong to me either. It belongs to the voters of Georgia, many of whom feel ignored by the very leaders who claim to fight for them. She walked away from the podium toward Abrams, still holding her tablet. The room grew tense once again, but instead of more confrontation, Crockett extended her hand. We don't have to agree on every detail, but we do need to show the unity we're asking voters to believe in. Republicans are watching us fight each other and cheering. Is that what we really want? The question hung there like a weight. Abrams stood frozen, caught between her frustration and the reality of politics. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then, after a long pause, Abrams extended her hand and shook Crockett's. It wasn't warm. It wasn't especially sincere, but it was something. Crockett returned to the podium. Now I'd like to actually talk about why I came here. How we can flip 3 key House seats in Georgia by focusing on issues that matter to everyday Georgians, not on personality battles between politicians. She launched into a detailed, data-driven presentation about voter concerns in critical districts. She showed polling data that revealed where traditional Democratic talking points were failing to connect. She highlighted pocketbook economic issues that were motivating swing voters. As she spoke, the mood in the room shifted. Donors who had been sneaking glances at their watches were suddenly jotting down notes. Party officials who had looked embarrassed during the earlier clash were now nodding. Even some of Abrams' closest allies seemed pulled in by Crockett's clear, actionable strategies. We don't need to throw out everything that's been built here, Crockett concluded. But we do need to be honest about what's working and what isn't. That's not disrespect. That's how we win. When she finished, applause erupted immediately, loud and sustained. Several donors stood to clap. A state representative in the back shouted, "That's exactly what I'm talking about." Abrams, now sitting at the side of the stage, didn't clap, but her expression had shifted again, from frustration to something more thoughtful. She was experienced enough to recognize when someone else had taken control of the story. The party chairman hurried to the podium, clearly relieved that what could have been a disaster had turned into a powerful moment. "This is the kind of strong but respectful debate that makes our party better," he said, trying to frame the moment. "Now, I believe we're scheduled for a short break before dinner is served." As attendees stood from their tables, the buzz was instant. "Did you see how she handled that?" One donor whispered. She turned a public attack into a masterclass on party unity. A state senator leaned toward his aide, muttering, "Get me a meeting with Crockett before she leaves town. She just showed more leadership in 5 minutes than I've seen in 5 years." Even a reporter from the Atlanta Journal, Constitution, who had been quietly watching from the press section, was overheard saying, "This is going to be a very different story than I thought as I was writing an hour ago." As servers brought out the first course for dinner, phones around the ballroom lit up with notifications. The confrontation had already spilled onto social and the clip spitting fast across X and TikTok. Abrams versus Crockett was trending, with users quickly taking sides. But unlike most viral political fights, this one didn't have a clear villain and hero. Instead, it showed something rare in politics today, a heated clash that turned into a moment of respect and even potential cooperation. Crockett, now surrounded by donors and party officials eager to speak with her, noticed Abrams sitting alone at her table, scrolling through her phone, likely watching the social media storm in real time. For a moment, their eyes met across the room. Crockett gave a small, respectful nod. After a pause, Abrams returned it. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't even real peace, but it was recognition that both women carried influence, both had something to offer, and maybe both had something to learn. By the next morning, the clash between Abrams and Crockett had blown past Georgia politics. Every major news network was covering the story, airing clips of the heated exchange and Crockett's composed response. Morning Joe led with the headline, "Democrats a Civil War or Path Forward." Abrams Crockett showdown highlights party tension. CNN's Kyron Reed, how Jasmine Crockett turned conflict into collaboration. Even Fox News covered it, though with its own spin. Democratic infighting exposes party weakness in Georgia. But beyond the headlines, something unusual was happening in Georgia itself. The Democratic Party headquarters reported their online donation system had crashed overnight due to a surge in small, dollar contributions. People who had never taken part in politics before were suddenly calling. A staffer told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, "Our phones haven't stopped ringing. People want to know how to get involved. It's like they saw something real and wanted to join." Amid the phrase, "respectful disagreement," was trending nationally, with many pointing to the Abrams-Crockett exchange as proof that political differences could be handled productively. The fundraiser had brought in $2,000 million, more than double expectations, as donors impressed by the substance of the debate wrote bigger checks. At her hotel, Congresswoman Crockett was buried in interview requests. She accepted only one, from a local Georgia public radio station. Asked about the confrontation, she stayed gracious. "Stacey Abrams has done incredible work in Georgia," Crockett said. "Sometimes passionate people clash passionately. What matters is what comes next." Meanwhile, Abrams posted a carefully worded statement on social media. "Last night's spirited exchange with Congresswoman Crockett shows the healthy debate within our party. While we may disagree on tactics, we share the same goals. I look forward to continuing this important conversation." It wasn't quite an apology, but from someone rarely willing to admit mistakes, it carried weight. By the weekend, something even more surprising took place. Abrams and Crockett appeared together at a voter registration event in South Fulton County, one of the areas Crockett had highlighted in her presentation. A photo showed them standing side by side, not exactly friendly, but professionally aligned. A local pastor who attended the event told reporters, "You could still sense some tension between them, but they were both there. That's what mattered. Doing the work. That's what counts to voters like me." The lesson was spreading far past Georgia. Political experts pointed out how the moment gave a guide for handling arguments inside the party. Instead of pretending disagreements don't exist or falling into harmful fights, the Abrams-Crockett example showed how to admit differences while still finding shared ground. "What we saw in that ballroom was a small version of what's happening in parties across the country," said one political science professor on MSNBC. "Older leaders are facing challenges from fresh voices, and the question is whether that ends in division or renewal." 3 weeks after the clash, Abrams did something hardly anyone thought she would. She asked Crockett to host a planning session with her senior staff. People in the room said Abrams opened by saying, "Congresswoman Crockett reminded us that being challenged doesn't mean being disrespected. We can take in new ideas while still respecting the work that got us this far." The two women didn't suddenly turn into best friends. They didn't agree on every single issue, but they found a way to use their passion and knowledge for common goals instead of against each other. In political spaces, the phrase, "pulling a Crockett," began to describe the skill of turning sharp criticism into useful conversation. Campaign teams looked closely at how she balanced holding her ground with still showing respect to a senior party figure. For ordinary voters, especially people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who were tired of endless fighting, that exchange showed them something they had been hoping to see again. Leaders able to disagree without tearing each other apart. 6 months later, when election results came in, Georgia Democrats had their strongest showing in 10 years. They flipped 2 out of the 3 House seats Crockett had marked as possibilities. They boosted their numbers in the state legislature, and turnout in the counties Crockett had pointed out on her tablet showed double-digit jumps. At the victory event, Abrams and Crockett stood together on stage, lifting their joint hands high in celebration. It wasn't just a staged photo. It was living proof that sometimes the most powerful reply to "get out" is "let's work together." The real winner that night wasn't one of the women. It was democracy itself, showing that strong disagreement, handled with care and focused on solving problems instead of personal attacks, could actually make a political movement stronger instead of weaker. For Americans across all political sides, it carried a strong reminder. Leadership is not about always being right or never being questioned. Real leadership is about how you react when someone says there may be a better path. And sometimes the most powerful words aren't shouted in anger, but said calmly in reply. I respect your work, but here's why we need to push further. That evening in Georgia didn't just shape two political careers. It changed how many people in the country thought about political arguments themselves. In an age of extreme division, it showed there was another way, where disagreement and respect could live side by side. If this story of conflict turning into cooperation, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment below about which leaders you'd like to see find common ground in the future. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our deep political breakdowns. Together we can learn more about the real forces behind the headlines.